George Leonardo is the founder of Cap Hill Crypto, which is a website dedicated to making federal crypto policy accessible for all. Today, we're going to get an update on what's going on in Capitol Hill in terms of crypto, talk about FTX and what impact that may have changed, and maybe more. Welcome back to How About That Crypto. I am your host, Bitcoin Stylist, and today I'm with George Leonardo from Cap Hill Crypto. How you doing today, George?
Doing well. Good to see you again. Thanks for having me back on.
Absolutely. I'm been really looking forward to this conversation. So I had messaged George back maybe a week, the first week that the FTX thing I think was happening, and you said we should talk about that in a couple weeks, and I'm glad we did because so much has happened, and so now I want to hear about what's going on. But first, for our viewers and listeners who have not, you may not be familiar with Cap Hill Crypto or did not watch our previous episode, would you give us a little bit of an intro into you and Cap Hill Crypto?
Absolutely. Yeah, been crazy times. It's always crazy in crypto, but it seems like these last few weeks have been crazier than ever. So yeah, brief background about me. I've been building a website called Cap Hill Crypto. As you mentioned, the main goal is to just make federal crypto policy more accessible. So regardless of what your background is with crypto or policy, hopefully you can come to my website, caphillcrypto.com, and get a good sense of what's going on in DC as it relates to federal crypto policy. So kind of the main resources I provide, I do a weekly newsletter Friday morning summarizing what Congress has done when it comes to crypto policy. Also have like a legislative tracker, so you can see every crypto related bill that's been introduced in Congress, get a high level summary, see who sponsored it, who co-sponsored it, and where that bill stands, what committee it's in, so on and so forth. But yeah, just a little more background on kind of why I got into it. I worked on the Hill for Senator Cornyn for 4 years. Not crypto policy. We didn't even have anyone working on crypto policy back then. This was 2013 to 2017. So I did that for 4 years. Then went to law school, did some bankruptcy litigation for a year. Went down the crypto rabbit hole end of last year. There's no going back once you go down it. So was just looking to start my own business. I always wanted to do that. And so I was realizing as I was reading about crypto, like the next one of the big obstacles to adoption seemed to be we need to get regulations in place. So I thought it was a nice area where I was interested in, but also had that experience working in policy and law. So yeah, earlier this year I started in March, launched it. Been gaining traction. It's been exciting. Just taking it 1 week at a time, one subscriber at a time. But yeah, excited to talk crypto, all things crypto and policy here with you.
Awesome, cool. So you're basically like my go-to person for getting into this conversation, and like I had mentioned before we started talking before the show, I really truly believe like the whole approach for the channel is that I want to track what's important to the enthusiasts, to the investor, to the entrepreneur in the Web3 and crypto space. And I talk all the time about I really don't see any real adoption risk other than it being banned by the government. I guess you could say FUD would be the other one, which is also kind of what I hope to dispel here, or at least get some clarity on. So why don't we first talk about the elephant in the room and this FTX situation? He was so involved on Capitol Hill,
Yeah.
and he was doing so many meetings. He was like the darling, and then it all came out that he was pulling the wool over everyone's eyes, or maybe he wasn't. But whatever happened, I would imagine that if I was a person that was really turning to him and good faith to, I understand the space and how to regulate it, and then I discover that there was some stuff going on behind the scenes that caused this whole thing to implode and a ton of my constituents to lose money, and I feel like I would be pretty pissed about it. Have you seen anything like that, or any evidence, anything to speak on that, to that point of sentiment?
Yeah. So as far as sentiment, I think kind of the short term, the most common reaction I've seen is I think everyone's like taking a pause here, right? As you mentioned, SBF was very active lobbying for especially one specific bill, the Digital Commodity Consumer Protection Act, and we can get in the weeds on that going forward. But I think there was some talk about possibly seeing some type of crypto regulation pass this end of this year. I think as of right now, for the rest of this Congress, after the FTX collapse, everyone just wants to one figure out, okay, what the heck happened here, because it seems like it was really bad, and what lessons can we learn from it, right? So I think on the bright side, one way to look at it, like one positive might be in terms of sentiment. There were a lot of people, I think, who in Congress who are still kind of sitting on the sidelines when it came to crypto. Um, maybe they're hoping it just goes away. It's just a bubble. Let's let the regulators just deal with it. Maybe they have the authority. But I don't think you can do that anymore, right? I think you've seen some members come off the sidelines, maybe who weren't as involved in crypto. And I think they're starting to realize, like, okay, we got to figure out what's going on here, because I mean, you turn on the news, you can't get away from the FTX, right? So they're going to have to at least get smart about the issue so they can talk knowledgeably about it, because questions are going to probably start coming. So that's kind of like high level sentiment. I will also say on the positive side, the people who were already like interested in crypto, like the few members that are active about it and want to see it succeed, I think they can recognize, like, look, this wasn't a crypto problem, right? This was your classic fraud case, right? This is someone saying they're doing something with your money and they did something else. And so that's good. And there's also the crypto skeptics out there. Like Senator Warren comes to mind, who I think is going to take the FTX and use it as an example. Like, look, told you this is all just fraud. But those parties were already going to have those positions anyways. So I think that's why I kind of key in on, like, the biggest change I think will be, how members who are on the sidelines, how they come into it. And hopefully they take the time and do the research and come out on the crypto proponent side, as opposed to the crypto skeptic side. And I'm
So
optimistic,
would
we'll
you
get,
say that it's
get to
too
good place.
early to tell whether or not whether or not the anti-crypto camp has gained more members?
Yeah, I think here's the thing. One of the most concrete ways we can look at it, right, is there was a hearing last week on FTX. And so that DCPA bill we talked about, one of the big questions was, all right, what are they going to say about it? And there's a big call, honestly. I think the more common reaction is to say, look, this is a sign that we need legislation, right? So we can make sure customer protections are in place until this doesn't happen to a US-based company. And so that's a good thing. But again, people want to figure out exactly what happened. And they really keyed in on a couple items in that hearing, and it's dealing with conflicts of interest. And I think it's because, we saw FTX, it seems like, I know all the facts are still being investigated. But, there's the sketchy relationship going on with Alameda. And so I think people want to make sure we know, all right, if you're an exchange, who are your counterparts, who you're dealing with, what's going on. And then that's kind of the other point generally, is just transparency, right? Like, whether it's a CFTC or SEC, whoever it's going to be, giving more insight into books and records, seeing what are they doing with customer funds. And so those are kind of like the top points. And when it comes to the DCCPA specifically, it's it's not going to happen this year, but it's not like they're just throwing it in the trash, right? At the end of the day, I think we'll ultimately see some type of bill that gives the CFTC jurisdiction over the crypto spot market, and they'll look to put in consumer protections. But yeah, if your main concern is is Congress going to look at this and say, let's ban crypto? I don't think that's a takeaway. I think it's more, all right, let's get legislation in place and let's really focus on consumer protections.
That's good to hear. It doesn't sound, because my first thought was, great, now they got all this ammunition, they're going to come out. No, I wasn't really confident that people were going to be able to separate the human part of this from the actual asset class and technology itself. So that's good to hear. So you mentioned the hearing. Could you tell us a little bit about, is there anything else in that hearing that we should know about or that was important?
Yeah, I think the main takeaways for me at the top were just, like, again, and as far as timing goes, nothing's probably gonna happen this year because we still don't know, right? A lot of the questions, pretty much every member started their questioning with, so the witness was the CFTC chairman, Rustin Benham, right? And so they want to know, like, what do you know? What can you tell us? What happened here? And it sounds like, outside of what's been publicly reported, people are still trying to get to the bottom of, what happened with the misallocation of funds. Was it just over leverage? To what extent? So I think that's going to take some time. There's going to be another hearing next week. House Financial Services, sounds like Senate Banking might want to do one. Maybe House Ag will do a hearing, and this is probably going to carry over into early next year, where we're still just that's the way Congress does fact finding, is to take a step back, because they like to do hearings, bring in witnesses. I think at some point people are going to want to see SBF before a committee hearing, and I think until you can kind of flesh that all out, like, and really get to the bottom of that first question of what happened, I think it's going to be hard to get to a point where there's any comprehensive legislation passed. And that makes sense, right? Like, you don't want to. I'd rather, honestly, Congress take the time and get good legislation and make sure we address the concerns that we need to, rather than rush something through. The other thing I was a little surprised about from the hearing is, one of the concerns with the DCCPA was that its application to DeFi. The bill was kind of written with this presumption, where the way the definitions were written, that there'd be like it was almost written as if they only had centralized exchanges in mind or centralized intermediaries in mind. So a lot of people were concerned about, would DeFi comply? I remember one witness use the expression, the definitions are unworkable as applied to DeFi. And there wasn't any discussion of that, which I thought was interesting, because I was hoping, Congress might look at this experience and say, oh, there's issues with transparency and conflicts of interest. Maybe this, some of the things that DeFi seeks to address, unfortunately didn't come up, but, we're still early in the stage. I shouldn't ask for too much, right? To ask for DeFi to come up with a congressional hearing just yet.
Well, what comes to mind when you bring that up is that, is how many of the, crypto Twitter and YouTubers and podcasters out there talk about how the government is all about centralized systems, and my first thought is like, oh, we're not going to talk about DeFi, even though like there would be so much more transparency with where the money was. And I was listening to Sam SBF's talk in one interview, and he was saying that funds were initially, in the beginning, were wired to Alameda's bank account, and then they were supposed to be transferred to FTX, but that never happened. And so like that kind of stuff, we would be able to totally see on chain if there was, that clarity.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it is interesting when you hear a lot of members talk generally about like we need more transparency in crypto. And I'm sure that there's areas definitely where we can benefit from transparency, and I agree transparency is a good thing, but it is a little ironic, like you said, like one of the benefits and why behind this technology is that there's a transparent public ledger in a lot of cases. So I do think there are some members, especially like Senator Toomey, I think brought up specifically recently in an interview, like the code committed no crime, right? I think was a line. And so I think there is a growing acknowledgement of members, slowly but surely. I think we're going to get there. There's organizations, educating members and staff, especially. It's really important to make sure the staff are aware, because right, they're the ones doing a lot of the heavy lifting when it comes to legislation. And so, I'm optimistic we'll get to the right space over time. And also, if you think about it, like as much as everyone was concerned about like the SBF's lobbying efforts, like it kind of came out in the end, right? Like it didn't work. The DCPA got stalled, and so here we are in this space where we have the time to hopefully come up with a better solution, and have the public's input on it, and get to a better place.
Well, a question about legislation, in terms of like getting something passed and like what needs to be in the bill and stuff. I was talking to a couple of clients of mine who are high-powered attorneys, and the conclusion that I got, or what I surmised, what I surmised from that is that creating a separately for legal framework for the crypto industry outside of the financial industry is something that is most likely not going to happen. Their opinion was, and if it does happen, it's going to basically create the whole thing I got from it was, it doesn't make sense to create a whole new framework because the financial system's legal framework is so robust, and it's been through so much development over time to get to where it is. And it makes more sense to kind of figure out how to plug in crypto into the financials, give them the same rules, but in the places where the rules might need to be changed. Can you talk a little bit on, could we expect a bill to basically be like, oh, this is how you define what a security is, this is how you define what a commodity is in digital assets, and then, oh, and by the way, everything else, just look to traditional financial regulation? Can you kind of help us understand? And do you know what I'm saying? You know what I'm trying to, like, I'm getting at
Yeah, I
here?
think I know exactly what you're saying. And I think it's a great question. And so, I guess at the top, I just want to make sure with my website and my resources, I try to stay objective as possible. So I won't say like what I think should be, but I can give you a very helpful sense of the background, how I think it's going to play
Okay.
out. So like what you said, right? Like we're going to use the systems already in place. I think, yes, just the way like legislation works these days is they're going to start with like the initial frameworks and, start with what you know, right? And so if you look at a lot of the bills that have been introduced so far and how they would seek to address the issue of like regulatory clarity, right? The biggest one, which assets are securities and which are commodities. A lot of them start by doing it where like you amend the books that's already on the place. So like Commodity Exchange Act, right? A lot of them start, and that's the CFTC's jurisdiction to police fraud and manipulation in commodities. And so I think what we're most likely to see, because this is what we've seen by the bills that have been introduced, is, rather than build something from scratch, say, all right, we already have this regulator in place with experience of policing fraud and manipulation. So a lot of these crypto assets seem to be similar to commodities. So we'll amend the Commodity Exchange Act, which is a bill that's already in place, and kind of draw from that. So things like, eliminating conflicts of interest, right? Like you said, these things aren't brand new problems, right? That's just, how do you apply them to this new technology? But I don't think you can completely overlook that fact. Like, this is new technology, and the technology itself is diverse, right? These tokens can be different. They all do different things. So I think you have to kind of find that balance of like, yeah, let's figure out what's worked well. And just from a practical standpoint, like if you're a staffer and how do you address these problems? I think it makes sense to look for things that have worked, and work within existing frameworks, but then balance that with, like, these are new technologies. So there's going to have to be some new rules in place that just address the unique characteristics of this new technology.
Do you think that a comprehensive bill is going to be the way they're going to go, or do you think that it's possible to kind of piece out things like stablecoin regulation, defining how or some sort of, I mean, I'm assuming they would do this with legislation, but like some sort of checklist or way to determine how to classify specific digital assets, or the other one would be like commingling funds and conflicts of interest.
Yeah.
Like, could these all be separate pieces of legislation, or do you think it's more likely to be a comprehensive legislation? And what do you think the pros and cons are between those?
Yeah. So I think it's going to be like a combination, but I think we can get to. I think we'll start where things are now. I think that comprehensive bill where it deals with, the regulatory clarity piece, I think that's just going to take time, especially, for some of the reasons we mentioned with the FTX collapse, and just that'll take more time to get to agreement. So I think that the advantage of breaking things off, like start with stablecoins, for example, like there's some bipartisan support. Everyone seems to be in agreement about the high level strokes of what a stablecoin bill should do, right? Like, let's get some transparency around what reserves are in place. Like, if you say your stablecoin is backed 1-to-1 with US dollars, like, let's open up the books. Let's make sure we can confirm that, so the public is aware and can kind of trust that. And so the pro, I think, for something like that is it might be a little easier to get that done. That's more palatable or easy to understand, this idea of a dollar that's just virtual. And so maybe you're able to get that through and then build momentum, right? Like, hey, look, we passed a stablecoin bill. The world didn't end. Like, let's go to something else. But then also, like, you don't want to lose sight of the fact, like, some smaller bills. So even like the end of this year, I've heard some people are still optimistic. Take a de minimis tax exemption bill, right? So this idea of when you go to buy coffee with Bitcoin, like, that shouldn't trigger a taxable event. And there are bills out there where some set the limit at like $50 or $200. Maybe something like that was already bipartisan support. Like, why not take the victory you can get? Sometimes you hear the analogy like, take the singles and doubles, don't just sit around waiting for the home run. And so if there's bipartisan support for something, why hold it up? I guess the only advantage sometimes of waiting for a comprehensive bill is if you get a lot of things people like, and then you put it together with some things that people might not be as popular, then maybe you can use it to get momentum and get the big bill through. But I don't know. I think the way I see things playing out, maybe take the singles and doubles while we can get them, especially given some of the negative press that's come to the industry this year.
Cool, awesome. I like that response here. So, in terms of like the rest of the year for crypto policy, why don't you give us kind of the lay of the land or what we can expect? I mean, I know we've already touched kind of on it a little bit as we've talked about the FTX stuff, but yeah.
Yeah, I think it'll be more a big thing to keep an eye on is like how members respond to FTX. Like, if it's not legislation, there's other ways Congress can kind of let their positions be known, whether it's a hearing. Maybe we'll see some more members come out and just weigh in, and we can kind of guess how they might act in the 118th. Maybe they'll become more active. Another thing we've seen is letters. A few members have sent letters. For example, like Senator Wyden, who's chair of the Senate Finance Committee, he sent some letters to centralized exchanges, looking for more information about protections they might have in place in the event the exchange goes bankrupt. So that's a good example, right? Legislation isn't going to pass this year to deal with that issue, but you can kind of see, all right, that Wyden seems to find that issue really important. So maybe the 118th, that'll be the piece he looks to attach to any crypto bill. So I looked for stuff like that where, people might realize they're not going to get a bill through at the end of this year, but maybe we can kind of preview the 118th a little bit more. A couple things I mentioned: the de minimis tax exemption. Another thing that might have a chance of passing this year would likely have to be attached to like a broader bill, not a crypto bill, but like a funding bill that needs to pass at the end of the year. Would be the broker definition fix. I don't know if you remember, end of last year, there was as part of the infrastructure bill, there was a provision attached that provided new tax reporting requirements for brokers of cryptocurrencies and transactions. But the broker definition was just really, really broad and would include anyone from like miners to software developers. And so that's one of those things. There's bipartisan support to fix it, including I believe Senator Portman's on one of the bills to fix it, and he was the one who wrote the bill that passed in the first place. So maybe that gets attached. I'll keep an eye out for that. Finally, maybe this National Defense Authorization Act has to pass this year. By the end of the year, there were a few amendments that touched on crypto. Nothing major. I'm just keeping my eyes on that. So there was one. Maybe I think one was like a study of blockchain technology. Another was, if you know, the ACES Act, the Accountability in El Salvador Act, which requires State Department to do a study of Bitcoin adoption in El Salvador. Honestly, had like a little bit of a negative tilt to it. If you look at what the study should include, I think a lot of it was coming from a place of concern that this might be used to launder money or help the cartels. But again, like these amendments are filed. I don't know if they'll be attached, but it's just something. Kind of this relates back to your previous question about whether you want a big bill or a smaller bill. The way legislation has been working these days is it's almost like, I think the expression of the Christmas tree bill, where all right, everyone knows that NDA has to pass this year and omnibus has to pass by the end of the year. Sorry, omnibus is the government-wide spent funding bill. So they know it's going to pass, and people might just start tacking things on where they can and hope it goes through with the broader bill, because no one's going to stand in the way to stop some of these bills when push comes to shove. So just I'll be monitoring that. That's what I'm looking forward to wrap up this year, or see if anything, hopefully something positive, and making sure nothing too crazy gets tacked on to the Christmas tree bills.
All right, and let's see what else we got. Okay, what about next year?
Yeah, so all right, so for all the FTX we talked about pushing things down, I do think next year you've seen a lot of commenters saying they think next year will finally be the year where we can't run from it any longer. Like, let's get comprehensive legislation done. Let's answer the one big question about which tokens or assets are securities, which are commodities, and then therefore no developers, entrepreneurs can figure out what their actual requirements are under the law. So that's a big thing to keep an eye out for. But to get into more specifics, right? So we got to remember, it was an election. It looks like the House is going to be controlled by Republicans, Senate Democrats, but very narrow majorities in both cases. So anything that gets done in crypto is going to have to be bipartisan, which we kind of already expected. And thankfully, it's remained pretty nonpartisan, especially in terms of any issue these days in Congress. So one thing I'm excited about: Patrick McHenry is going to be chair of Financial Services Committee. He's a very staunch crypto advocate. He's mentioned that he wants to make crypto legislation a priority. Big leader on stablecoins. So again, we talked about stablecoins a little bit. Maybe that moves up as a way to let's get the low-hanging fruit, get that done before we pivot to the broader issues or a more comprehensive package. But then there's also, House Ag Committee, now that Republicans are in charge, will be Chairman Glenn Thompson. He had introduced a bill earlier this year, again, aimed at giving CFTC jurisdiction over the crypto spot market. So I'm wondering, now he's going to be chair of the House Ag. He's kind of in the driver's seat. Maybe that bill gets a little more attention this year. It seemed like everyone focused on DCCPA, so maybe his bill gets a little more traction. I think those are the main things. Maybe last bit to highlight is in leadership, Rep. Tom Emmer from Minnesota. He's going to be the whip. So the whip is kind of like the third most powerful person on the House side, and everyone remembers House of Cards. At least the first season was all about was the whip. So he's a staunch crypto advocate. So things are kind of falling into place in terms of I always think one of the biggest challenges when it comes to getting anything done is just there's people want so much done. Sometimes we get in the crypto bubble, but it's really just a matter of can you become a priority. And so the fact that there's some people in the right places and committee heads and leadership who are interested in crypto, and I think even for them politically, I'm sure it can be advantageous to be the guy, or the group of people who got crypto legislation done. So there's incentives that are in place. So I'm excited. I'm gonna keep being optimistic, because why not? So hopefully next year is the year we get crypto legislation passed, and yeah, in a good place.
Nice. So what was I going to ask you? Oh, so I just like, as this conversation is unfolding and we're talking about next year, it just totally struck me that the actual reason why I hit you up to ask you for an update was actually because of the election. It was before FTX
Yeah,
had happened, and
yeah, it's
so
funny.
what's that?
No, I'm saying it's funny because like the FTX happened on the first bit of it happened on election day, and so I feel like people forgot that about the election in the crypto world, at
Yeah.
least. Sorry, go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, it's good. So it's so I guess the big thing is that I was asking about, and you definitely just touched on all this, was how did the election impact crypto? Because like there are concerns about, who are these incoming people that are all the people, all the seats that are turned over. How many did we lose any crypto advocates in the election that you know of?
I feel like because the FTX happened, I kind of like pivoted off the election. I think overall we're good. I'd have to go back and look. There was nothing where I'm like, we're in big trouble. The one thing this wasn't because they lost the election, but Senator Pat Toomey, who's the ranking member on Senate Banking, is retiring, and so from my experience, I think he might have been perhaps the most knowledgeable, especially on the Senate side, and the staunchest crypto proponent. So that's kind of a loss in terms of a crypto advocate leaving Congress. But overall, like I said, because of on the House side, if you look at some of the committee chairs that committee members will now become chairs who are crypto advocates. Overall, I think there was a lot of good there.
Nice.
The other thing I'll just highlight about the election, though, if you noticed, even though it was on election day, there were still members of Congress tweeting about and issuing official press releases about FTX. So I feel like that shows how far we've come in terms of crypto getting the attention of Congress, where, on election day, nonetheless, people still took time to be like, we need to talk about this, we need to comment on this, because it's just that prevalent. So I don't know, maybe a silver lining of some of the
So
bad
yeah, it
that's going
sounds
on.
kind of like maybe there's a lot of noise out there. There's inflation, and there's the looming World War III, whether it's with Russia or with China over Taiwan. These and energy crises around the world, and
Yeah.
then like the environment. Like there's so much out there. Not to mention our own domestic issues that we need to worry about, which
Yeah.
is plenty. So
Yeah.
if you for in terms of getting something out of Congress, it sounds like maybe it was a good thing that it's not a good thing that FTX imploded, but maybe
Yeah.
it's the timing kind of might end up being like a little bit of a positive for the
Yeah.
future of crypto.
So it's unfortunate, but you hear the expression a lot, like nothing forces Congress to act like a crisis, right? Like Congress is not known for getting things done. Sometimes they need something like this to, you know, light a fire, so to speak. But one thing I might add, because you were talking about it, and people ask me this a lot, is like, what can we do to advocate or to be better advocates to get crypto legislation that we want through? I think it's important to remember, like you mentioned, a lot going on. Like when I was a staffer, I mean, I would spend all day meeting with people from different groups. And my portfolio, like I covered healthcare, education, technology, science, labor. And so you got to remember, like for a lot of members and their staff, like crypto, they didn't go to Congress. There's very few people in Congress or their staff who went there to work on crypto legislation. So, you really got to start from the basics and just, you, you can't really expect everyone to be an expert on it or for it to be their main priority, because their constituents, honestly, the percentage of the constituents who want them to make crypto a priority probably isn't as high as we might like yet, and so it's going to take some time, but that's why the biggest piece right now, I think, is just education, getting people comfortable with this. If you're calling offices, meeting with members, I probably say this as a former staffer, but it's good to try to be patient, just understand that they got a lot on their plate. And so the more you can make their lives easier, maybe helping them out with, the research or whatever, and just explaining stuff to them. I think it's important to keep in mind, because I think people forget that. I even forget it sometimes, like there's not one crypto staffer in every office. It's usually probably one issue on someone's plate out of many.
Yeah, that's good. And I originally started the show because I have a couple of podcasters, YouTubers that I listen to, and one of them, Tony Edwards from Thinking Crypto, he
Yeah,
was
yeah.
saying, yeah, you like him? I like him a lot.
It's a good job. Yeah.
Yeah, he does a good job. So I think he's one who really kind of gave me almost like permission, if not a call to action, saying that we have a big fight. We need the legislation to get through. We just need to make sure that it's not negative legislation or harmful legislation for innovation, and that means that everyone needs to call their representatives, write their representatives, but also post and comment and engage with or create your own content to help spread the word and get rid of the FUD out there with that is being at the time it was just only a year, not even a year ago, where I was watching the news and the mainstream media seemed to be reporting on things that were months old, which in crypto is like a year, 2 years old. And
Yeah.
it's like it's moving so fast, and it's like they
Yeah.
just got so out of date. And I think that the mainstream media has gotten a lot better about it as well. So is there like anything in addition to that? So be patient. Anything else that anybody can do, or maybe a way to do these things in a more productive manner that you could share?
Well, I would just like to highlight, one of the things that struck me when I was working on the Hill is just how accessible it actually is. Like we would take a meeting with so I worked for, a Texas senator. So if you came and you called up, assuming we had the notice, like we would meet with everyone. And, if we couldn't get you in with a direct one-on-one meeting, then, there was like this event, Texas Thursday Coffees, where, it would be a way where like you could go get coffee with the senator and be a little more like informal, fit a lot of people in that way. But if you are in DC, I don't know, everyone can travel there. You try to get a meeting. I mean, like I said, we represented there's 27 million people out there when I was working, and we hit everyone in. So also call. We do track calls, writing in letters, emails, whatever. We tracked it all. We get the senator report at the end of every week. So it is more accessible than you think. I know some people think, oh, you have to be Sam Bankman-Fried to make a difference. It helps to the donations, the money, that is part of it. I'm not gonna lie, but you can still, have an impact just meeting with folks, especially with something like crypto, where, like I said, the biggest problem is just education, right? So if you can just be a resource to people. But the other thing is, I mentioned that's going to DC, but all the representatives and senators have offices, local offices. So spread throughout their state or in your district. And so, that's another way to just maybe, reach out and be a point of contact, try to get a meeting that way. They're usually less busy than the local offices. And so, that might be one way to just present yourself, put a face to the name. And yeah, just I guess what I'm trying to say is, yeah, don't hesitate to try to make a contact, call up, send in letters, whatever you can we can do to move the needle at this point. It takes everyone together to really move the needle, but baby steps.
Nice. Well, to wrap it up, I got a couple of questions. I don't want to say like rapid fire, but I'd be curious to know one. First question: do you have any concerns about the future of crypto? Any specific coin or any group of coins following this collapse, and what you know and how you're plugged into, and in the DC?
So honestly, part of why I'm doing the policy side of it is because, I'm not, as far as like the investing and the finance side of things, that's over my head. I'm a big believer in just the DCA. But my big concern is to give you like for when it comes to the policy side is that like will members take the time to educate themselves and come about this the right way, or are they just going to have like a knee-jerk reaction and say, look at Terra, FTX, I'm done with it, and they won't take the time.
Right.
So that's my biggest concern for crypto generally is like, and this is really for everyone, right? Like even family and friends, when I talk to them, like I'm still at the point where a lot of folks are like, yeah, well, isn't it just like all unregulated, or isn't it just a scam? And so, that's my concern is that people don't they get to that point and they don't get to the point where like take remittances, for example, they don't realize like, oh, like who's going to come around the other side of this and be like, no, I don't want people who work their butts off and try to send money back to family they shouldn't be able to do that for like using this cheaper, more efficient technology. I want them to pay like the extra 10% or whatever using
Right.
some centralized third-party intermediary. So I guess that's my answer for my biggest concern.
Got it. And our what was I going to say? There was
Not
another.
financial and legal advice, by the way. I forget to say that.
Yeah, none of this is financial advice. And I'm more specifically thinking about like a class of stuff or a
Okay.
like maybe exchange token, not necessarily for the terms of like, for example, like I pay attention to the project, I look at the coins as projects. I don't look at them as like investment
Yeah.
opportunities. I would only personally make an investment in something if I felt like it had a future to grow. And but first I want to understand the project, what it is, what type of problems
Yeah.
that it solves, and whether or not I think that this makes sense for a solution to the problem. Like, are they actually solving the problem, or are they just coming up with a new way to solve the problem that's not necessarily improving
Yeah.
anything? Well, anyway, I forgot my other questions. Like that's
Yeah,
like
good, man.
definitely.
I think we covered a lot here. This was good.
Yeah.
I feel like we got to cover a lot of bases.
Yeah, I think so too. Well, I do appreciate you coming on the show and taking the time to update us on what's happening Capitol Hill. Like I say all the time, I think that that's where the largest risk relies, is in on Capitol Hill. Oh, I know. What about one last question? What about I know you talk about the federal level. Is there any reason to talk to, or reason or strategy for talking to local lawmakers? Because I saw the New York had that they
Yeah.
just had
Oh,
it's a big deal, like what they just passed up there.
100%. I'm glad you brought that up because I am more focused on the federal, but state, I mean, it's so important and you can have more of an impact, right? Usually because you can focus on your state. It's a little smaller. You don't have to get buy-in from people from all over the country like you do at the federal level. But states also, there's a whole expression like laboratories for democracy, but they're also laboratories for innovation, right? And so you can look at a state like Texas is really trying to present themselves as in a way where, like Bitcoin mining, for example, is I think really taking root there. Um, Wyoming's very crypto friendly. I mean, from what it seems, again, I'm not as focused on the state side, but even just as far as like using these states as examples of like, hey, look what this state did. Look at all the jobs they created. Look at the economic benefits. And that's the stuff that I probably should have brought this up earlier. But that's the stuff that's really going to move the needle when you can go to your member instead of saying, I want you to support crypto because, I love it. Just if you can go to them and say, look, it's going to create this amount of jobs. It's going to promote innovation and create huge economic benefits, create financial freedom, empower individuals, stuff like that. Like stuff that's really going to, I hate to say it, but almost like think of yourself as like a salesperson, right? And so I think the states can provide examples that you can use and point to sell.
Cool. Yeah, I just like, as you talking, I'm like thinking, I feel like if we take all this and really apply it, because we're so quick to jump to the federal level on some issues that are really big and affect us all. But I would think that the state level representatives are concerned, or not, the federal representatives of the states are concerned with their constituents in their states. And if the local government is effectively being educated on the benefits and the future of crypto, then that should have an influence at the federal level as well, right?
Yeah, no, exactly. And these people are in touch with each other, right? Like senators, reps, they're meeting with the governors, the state reps. State reps today are probably thinking about being the federal representative, congressmen,
Totally.
senators down the line. So it's all connected, right? Especially within the parties, they're always, they're going to the same fundraisers, same meetings, same constituent events, state fairs, whatever, right? Like it's a smaller world than you think, right? So the more you can, and just again, like state level, it's important. They have their own, areas of jurisdiction that they specialize in or whatever. But yeah, don't overlook the state level at all.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you for your time. And I think that's a great place to wrap it up. Do you have any last minute things to say before we sign off?
I just want to say thanks again for having me. Let's do it again in the new year. Hopefully, next time we can do it, we'll have something positive to point to, or more positive to point to, something that actually got passed. But yeah, for the viewers who are interested, if you could check out the website, caphillcrypto.com. Sign up for the weekly newsletter. It's free Friday mornings. And just, summaries of new bills that have been introduced, hearings that have gone on. Just try to keep people up to date. Let me know what you think. Always looking to hear feedback. Try to improve the quality of the content. So thank you again. Thank you to everyone who watched and listened. Thank you guys.
Awesome. And I'll leave all those links in the description below. Thank you again. Have a great
Appreciate
day.
it.
Enjoy your holidays. And I look forward to talking to you again soon.
Sounds good, man. Happy holidays.
All right, man. Take care.